Hi, I'm Loyd Auerbach, Director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, and welcome to the last of our tape series on busting ghosts in the 90s, providing you with information, the basics of becoming a paranormal investigator. I'm sitting here in front of the Moss Beach Distillery, a haunted restaurant that I love coming to, and a haunted restaurant which you've heard a bit about and watched a bit about if you've been paying attention to our tapes. A restaurant like this provides us with a living laboratory, a place where we can continue to come back to and get more and more information, more witness testimony, and check out what's really happening. And it provides us with more of an understanding of a haunting or apparitional phenomenon. On this fifth tape, we'll provide you with more that you need to know, kind of final issues that are important. You know, besides the paranormal issues, there are psychological considerations, and there's a place at which the investigator must stop, and very often a psychologist or counselor needs to come in. There are legal issues that might come up, as well as monetary ones that can arise in your cases. There are also situations surrounding the media when they might be involved, especially when the family's already called them before you even step foot in the house. More importantly, any of these situations require you to think quite a bit, and that's what we're going to emphasize here. And in that spirit, our audience, our seminar participants, provided us with some good questions, which we provide good answers to, and you'll be watching that whole session. And finally, after the question and answer session, there's a bit of a summary, so you have a good understanding of everything that we've covered in the day's work. Okay, for this last module, we just want to talk to you about some other considerations, including psychological, working with a psychic, from the perspective of how to find a good one. We want to talk a little bit about some legal issues that might pop up for you, money issues that pop up, and just kind of take the issue of media involvement just for a few minutes, because that's also a bit important to consider. Take the last Q&A and we'll close out for the day. Psychological issues are important because, you know, as I mentioned in the earlier pieces, and I think as Annette mentioned, if people are frustrated or upset, they might need somebody to talk to. But finding a good psychologist is often not that easy. Finding somebody who is willing to allow for someone's belief system to include the psychic is also not that easy, though it's easier today than it has been in the past, thanks to the advent of humanistic psychology and more specifically transpersonal psychology. The problem I find very often is people will be afraid to tell their therapist because even mentioning that they had a psychic experience makes certain therapists or psychologists go, oh, we've got to give you the DSM-4 and see if you're psychotic.
Yes.
You know, some psychiatrists immediately want to prescribe drugs because their belief does not allow them to even consider that somebody's belief is legitimate. More importantly, they don't even allow that a person can have a belief without having the experience. It's entirely possible not to be crazy or not to be disturbed, have a psychic experience that's not even psychic, in other words, have a misperception or misunderstanding, and yet the perspective of some psychiatrists is that if you've had this experience, you must be crazy, or at least disturbed. The whole issue of misperception, of making a mistake, rarely ever enters into it. And that worries me more than anything else. People make mistakes about their experiences without having to be psychologically disturbed or upset or anything else. So trying to find somebody who is kind of open to this is tough, and one of the things we're planning on doing in the future is actually trying to address that issue with therapists so they have an understanding from a background, almost like anthropology, that they have an understanding of different belief systems, and it's okay for a person to have a belief system without them being, that belief system necessarily meaning that their reality is screwed up. We all know that from dealing with people with different religious backgrounds, from different cultural backgrounds, and so on. Now, right now, it's very difficult to find a therapist or a counselor who's involved. One suggestion, if you do need to find a good referral, is to, if you know any therapist personally, to approach them first. You know, hopefully there's somebody that you know that has an interest. Do word of mouth. That's a really good way to find somebody. You might actually try to find out about some of the folks that advertise in some of the more New Age publications like Common Ground and Open Exchange, and there are some publications like Intuition where you find people. The problem is you don't know how good a therapist they are from those ads.
Right. I think it's better to get a referral, then that way you know kind of where they stand and where they're at, and if they're really open to any kind of psychic phenomena whatsoever.
There's an organization here in Northern California called OPUS, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. which is set up specifically for this kind of situation, to give people referrals to doctors and psychologists and other people. It's not a big enough network yet. That's something that Opus and other groups are hoping to expand. Also, the Parapsychology Foundation in New York City has got a small, growing list of therapists, as does the ASPR, the American Society for Psychical Research. So, and very often people in parapsychology know of other people to refer to that are going to be at least open to it. But it's something you need to consider, that generally if there's fear or other situation, just even without there being any psychological disturbance, you need to be prepared to at least refer them to an organization who can get them somebody. Sometimes some of the various graduate schools in your area, you know, and JFK, for example, has a transpersonal counseling center, and it's a good start to go someplace like that, too. Rosebridge Graduate School, which has the parapsychology program, has places people to refer to.
And I think there's University Transpersonal University down in Palo Alto.
The Institute for Transpersonal Studies, yeah.
Yes.
Transpersonal Psychology, rather.
That's it.
Yeah, so there are plenty of places.
Palo
There are
Alto.
places in other parts of the country, too. However, calling your basic university psychology department will often get people in trouble. I've actually gotten referrals from some psych departments, but other psych departments have basically, I know people have called me after finding me after a long time of trying to find somebody like me. They say that they got asked to come in for testing as soon as they said that they had a ghost in their house.
Right. This person is crazy.
That's
you
right,
know?
Immediately. So it's something to consider when you're dealing with it. Now, the other side of it is, what if you've got a situation where there is a psychological disturbance? Okay? You need to know a little bit about counseling yourself. So reading up a little bit, at least a little bit, remember, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. So don't pretend to try to be a counselor. That's illegal also in the state of California and in most states across the country. So you have to be real careful about that. But at least having knowledge so that you can recognize that there's a problem, so again, you can get the referral going, is important. And also, there may be a situation where you may have to consider calling the police or other organizations. You have to be ready to do that too.
That's right.
Okay, especially if you notice, you know, there's spousal abuse going on. You may have to consider that that's a possibility, that you want to be involved with that. Maybe not.
And that's why it's very good of what Loyd was talking before about never going by yourself to do an investigation. Always go with someone.
I've broken that rule
one or
many
two
times,
other-
even recently, but, and I slap myself silly for doing it.
Yeah, it's just not a good idea.
Yeah. I can tell you one place where it's okay to do that. Your typical public place or haunted restaurant, you know, if it's a public location, we're not talking about a family setting, that there's generally never a problem with that because it's a public place. And it's unlikely that if something's been going on for 50 years that that a crazed person has been in the place for 50 years, unless of course that crazed person is the ghost. Then you need to find someone psychic with a background in counseling skills like Annette, because we may have a little psychological counseling of the ghost there.
Right.
Other legal issues that can pop up, let me just talk about that first before I turn it over to Annette for something important. We have to be real careful when we're in there to make it clear that we as investigators cannot guarantee removal or discontinuation of a situation. No one can guarantee that. Okay, short of perhaps blowing up the house. You know, if you knock off the principals, then you're okay, but that's a little bit drastic, I think. And that's really important because many of the folks who are out there who are Ghostbusters, or there's a couple who are demonologists who call themselves demonologists. There's several out there who do that. There are a group of other folks out there, and they will claim 100% success. I know psychics who are paid big bucks to go into cases claiming absolute success. And that rarely ever happens. The only thing that ever happens is the money is taken. So you have to be really careful that up front you can say that, because we don't know, I mean, we don't obviously have any proof of the existence of this phenomena. So how can we prove to anybody that we've gotten rid of it? How can we guarantee that that's going to happen? All we can do is guarantee that we can provide them with information. We can try to figure out what's going on and offer them suggestions and referrals perhaps to other agencies or to other people if that's necessary. And that's very important from the legal standpoint up front. Okay, especially if at any point in the future you're going to take money. It's actually less important that if you don't take money, but even then you've got to be careful not promising something. Here's an interesting point about that, though, and that is, because working occasionally in the legal field, I've talked to a number of attorneys about this, and there's a very interesting situation. If I were to be sued for not getting rid of somebody's ghost, the burden of proof would be on the family to prove that there was a ghost to begin with. That, in some respects, would be a case worth losing. Because if you could establish in court that ghosts exist, think about it. I find that unlikely that any attorney would even take a case like that for that very reason. They'd first have to prove that ghosts exist. So we have actually a much better shot, though, at proving that in court than we would actually in the court of science, the way things stand today. But that's an important thing to remember. That issue about the guarantee, though, if you keep that going, if you just keep saying, you know, we can't promise anything, because you can't, but you can always say, people in this field have absolutely been able to help people before. It's certainly not unheard of, and it's certainly fairly common to help people get rid of situations. That's the track record. But can we promise in this particular situation? Absolutely not. Okay, and that's kind of your legal disclaimer on situations. Also, it's a good idea if there's damage being done in the property that you make sure that somebody's with you at all times so that they don't assume that you broke something. You don't want to get sued later on for breaking things down. And interestingly enough, one case I got involved with, which involved water appearing, it was a poltergeist case with water bursts appearing all over the place. The insurance company paid off on the water damage because poltergeists were not an exclusion in the insurance policy. And what ended up happening was I actually got a call from the insurance company about the situation, and I told them what I knew about poltergeist phenomena. They're like, oh, okay, we'll have to pay off on this one.
Oh.
So I don't know if they are exclusions anymore. I think actually I understand that at least in that family's policy it is an exclusion. But keep in mind that there are other situations that could crop up that are amusing in some respects. And the other side, the one last piece about the legal issues is that I've gotten called occasionally on by attorneys who've got clients who claim that they're possessed, and that's why they did the crime that they did. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. Killed somebody, they claim they were possessed, and they may. And the simple response to that, in terms of the best way for an attorney to handle that case, plead insanity. I mean, because you can find certainly lots of psychologists who will be able to tell them that they're crazy. And the reason is there was actually a case in New England where a young man killed his wife's, I think it was his wife's boss, not his wife's, his girlfriend's boss, in a fight. And a little backstory on this, this girlfriend's younger brother had supposedly been possessed a few months earlier, and there was a ritual exorcism done, and this boyfriend, in the middle of the exorcism, said, "Go ahead and take me on," you know, playing the brave hero, and nothing happened there, and the kid was okay. But a few months later, this fight broke out between the boyfriend and the woman's boss, and he killed the guy and was arrested for murder. Well, as it came out, there were several things that happened. First of all, there were two people who claimed to be demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were involved in the case. They said that they could show that the guy was possessed. I don't know how they were going to do that, but the judge right up front said something very simple. We get it when you start talking about demons and the devil. There's one thing that has to be proven first in court. Does God exist? I don't want to touch that question. You have to come up with a different defense. The other mitigating factor was the guy was drunk when he beat up and killed the other man. So you might say it was a demon. It was demon rum. Yeah. It was that old alcoholic demon in that sense. But you know, that was the factor that actually played into it. But when I've gotten calls from people on this, the issue is we can't prove that there is anything psychic happening. We can't prove that somebody's been possessed. We can't prove that a ghost is doing this. The best you can do is talk about what the evidence is. And then if you get into issues of fraud, which is one place where I think that lawsuits could come up, where one person is doing something fraudulently to another, you have to be an expert in magic, like I said, to talk about this. There was one case, I'm going to finish up with this on this particular point. Up in Petaluma, a retired CHP officer and his wife and his stepson, his wife's son by previous marriage, were having a poltergeist case happening. Things were happening around the house. More importantly, rocks were being thrown, pelting the house from the outside. This is actually, there's some other basis of this in the literature for this kind of cases. Scott Rogo did a few years ago. And one of these situations happened when there was a picnic or a barbecue happening with like 27 CHP officers at this guy's house, and these rocks were pelting the house, and they were inside at the time, and they went outside and they couldn't find anybody outside. They scattered in all directions, and they were pretty sure, though, the guys that were investigating this for the CHP, like, this was not an official investigation in any way, shape, or form. There were a couple cops who were at that picnic were there. The boy clearly had some issues. His father originally had been, his real father was black, his mother was white and Jewish, and he was transplanted from San Francisco to Petaluma when his mother got remarried, and he's in an area that's predominantly white, almost no Jews, felt really out of sorts, but he had made a few friends. His friends were the wrong sort of friends to make, apparently, and they were faking this. A bunch of teenage boys can be awfully fast when they have to be, especially when they just throw the rocks and run. They were, in fact, faking this. And there was an issue of whether or not the CHP officers who were embarrassed by this wanted to pursue this legally with the kid. And, they wanted to bring me. I said, don't, leave me out of this. This is between the parents and the boy, and between you guys and the boy. It has nothing to do with us as investigators. We found out how this was happening. Now it's up to you to pursue it however you want. Interesting thing about this case was I recognized the couple when I first walked into the house, because we had a show here in San Francisco called People Are Talking years ago, and a local talk show, and there used to be a lot of psychics on the show, and I used to do the show once in a while, and this couple was like, they were psychic fans. They were in the audience in the front row every single time something psychic was happening. So when I walked in and said, you guys go to, I recognized them, so they were really into the whole psychic belief system. It was very easy for their son to fool them. Very easy. They were just ready for it. They wanted to have psychic experiences. So you have to kind of look at these things and how you get involved with them. Last piece, money issue. Do you charge for this? I was advised actually a few years ago by several psychologists, interestingly enough, and then by my accountant, who is a skeptic and doesn't believe in any of this stuff, separately, to charge some money for this. The psychology behind this is that people often value something if they pay for it, and often don't value something if they don't pay for it.
They will not pay any attention to hypnotism if they don't pay for it.
Right. So there's an issue around that. And that doesn't mean you can't have a sliding scale and charge somebody $1 and somebody else $100 for the investigation or whatever else. My accountant said, do you go in there and offer information? It's like practically giving them a mini course in parapsychology. That's valuable. So even if they're not paying for the investigation, they're paying for information. And the issue is your time worth something? When you're starting out, it's not, necessarily. But as you get more and more into this and become, quote, professional, as professional as you can get being a Ghostbuster, you can charge money. Just be really careful how much you charge, and be really careful not to charge people where you think it's not appropriate. Consider there is an ethics here. If you don't charge people, guaranteed they'll want to pay you. Take the money if they offer it to you. Just don't take too much, That's another issue. Then there are those and this kind of dovetails into this last piece, people who have called those psychics who can promise to get rid of anything and pay them $500 or $600, but they don't want to pay you a cent because you're a scientist and they shouldn't have to pay scientists. And I basically say to them, and I shouldn't have to come. And that's a situation where they're very happy to pay somebody who they felt, and sometimes it's after talking to me and saying, I want to charge you $100, and they don't want to pay for that, but they'll pay $500 for a psychic who claims absolute success. And why didn't they want to pay me? Because I can't guarantee success, because I'm telling them the truth.
Right.
So finding a good psychic is the other piece.
Right, and that is so very important, because you don't want to hire someone off of the 800 number who claims that they are...
Who are mostly actors, by the way.
Yes, I'm glad you said that and I didn't. You have to be very, very careful in having a psychic working with you who has had experience, and also one who has a great deal of integrity, one who can see very well, their intuition is very well developed, and also that they have a great sense of humor. Very, very important to have that sense of humor, because as we've been talking all throughout the whole workshop, I've been telling you how important it is for you to keep that humor and to be very light, and the same kind of feeling has to be with the psychic. If the psychic is real heavy and comes in there and you go, oh my gosh, this person is really kind of scary, what you're going to do is you're going to create even more fear on the part of the inhabitants of the house or the hotel or the restaurant.
And can I add something? And let's face it, people with a sense of humor have a much more grounded sense of reality than people who take themselves too seriously.
Yes. I think that's very true. And the feeling that I have is that when you have a great deal of humor and you're able to balance yourself a lot better so that you can stay more focused on what it is that you're doing with the humor. And as Loyd just said, you can laugh at yourself, you know. Oh, well, okay, so I made a mistake, just like we all make mistakes. So you have to be able to laugh at yourself. So the psychic has to be well educated in knowing what it is that they're doing, knowing the difference between the ghost, an impression, psychokinesis, what is going on. The psychic also needs to be a very good counselor. Extremely good counselor, to be able to create that rapport with the people as well as you as the investigator. Because if the psychic also has that feeling, as I told you before, people love talking to a psychic. Because, oh gosh, I'm going to get some more information. That's what everybody thinks, okay?
They actually give more information sometimes to a psychic than they get.
Yeah.
Depending on the psychic.
Exactly. And so it's very exciting to them, and so that psychic person has to be very good and be very aware of who they are, what they're doing, understand completely about the whole situation. And last of all, if someone comes in and says, oh, well, I want $500, $800, $1,000 to do this, forget it. That is not the person that you want there, because what they're doing is they're just looking for the money. They're not looking for...
And there's also a sense of not having an idea of reality.
Of reality, yes. Exactly.
People can barely, I mean, when people will have to pay for a plumber if it costs $300 or $400. They don't have to pay $300 or $400 for something like this. And they often don't have the money to pay the plumber, let alone pay for something like this.
Right.
So
right.
That clearly shows that they don't know their audience, who their clients are going to be. They don't know the average person, for that matter. They probably have a clientele of people who are very wealthy who come in and pay $400 or $500 for a reading. Well, that's great, but those people rarely ever call. They certainly don't call us. They call the psychic, actually, to deal with the situation. Also, you know, and part of why we wanted to talk about this is that for you folks, if you're going to get into the investigations piece of this, both to open yourself up, as we talked about earlier, but also if you ever want to work with a psychic, you need to interview the psychic. You need to grill the psychic. Necessarily, you don't have to necessarily get a reading, but you have to get a feel for at least their attitudes. At least you know that even if they don't have a bit of psychic ability themselves, for real, they're good observers, they're grounded in reality, they're ethical, and they're nice people, and they got a sense of humor, so that at least they're good co-investigators with a sense of the belief system, the background. So, see what I'm getting at with that? I mean, at least you're pulling in a good co-investigator, even if they're not really psychic in that sense. They can observe things, and probably if they're a good, like I said earlier, if they're a good fake psychic, they're great observers of human behavior, and they might be, I hate to say this, but as good as a real psychic. So you kind of run into these situations. Yes, Brian?
Is one way to do it, you call a psychic and say, what's my name?
No, you call the psychic and say, hey, you were supposed to call at 2 o'clock. Actually, if they have caller ID, they probably know your name.
How do you, if you're going to do an investigation, do you hire a psychic?
You know, many psychics have an interest in this. And many psychics will just come along out of interest for this sort of thing. I mean, really, honestly. I've actually had psychics call me and say, I'm willing to come on a case with you.
Sure.
Because they're interested in going out with somebody who knows from the investigative standpoint what it's like to be an investigator. They want to learn too. So I think that's fine. You can't just simply call out of the yellow pages, something like that, and expect to find somebody. Again, it's word of mouth. Is the best. Actually, word of mouth is the best way to find a psychic anyway.
Right.
So,
to get referrals.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yes.
How do you address the situation sometimes of the hostility that can come up about the skepticism? I know a certain amount of skepticism is very healthy because it gets you to investigate a lot of things. But I've heard of something right now where somebody's giving away, I don't remember if it was $1,000 or $1 million, somebody can prove
$1.5 million.
We
The
know
Amazing
this.
Randy, the James Randy Educational Foundation, which is to me an oxymoron.
Yes, we know about
I said that on
him.
tape, didn't I? Good.
How do you handle it? You handle it with a great deal of humor. I did a television show with his second-tiered man, I believe. And he was trying to prove on the television show that I was not a real psychic, and there are not real psychics out there. And needless to say, throughout the whole hour, I never argued with him, but I had clients who had come, and I had a doctor sitting in the audience, and he had a doctor as well. And I didn't have to prove myself at all. In fact, I never tried to prove myself. I only explained what I did, how it worked, and how I perceived it. And my clients stood up in the audience and gave all the feedback. It was absolutely astounding.
I'll throw one more piece in. I've said on the record that a challenge like that, if you read, and not all groups have the same restrictions, but Randy's challenge, as far as I'm concerned, is bogus, in the sense that it asks of the claimant a couple of things, one of which is that if you, and I don't remember the exact language right now because I don't have it in front of me, but this is for the tape, in case Randy's watching this. Basically something like, if you can't do it under the conditions that are set up and agreed upon and set up, you pretty much have to claim or admit that you never had the abilities. So it'd be like an athlete, who has been able to run a 100-yard dash in 5 seconds and can't do it at the time they actually do the test. So now he has to claim that all the 100-yard dashes he did at 5 seconds or less before didn't exist. Made them up. Basically, you're claiming you're a fraud or you're an idiot. And the fact is that with human performance, nobody does anything 100% of the time. So why take a chance like you're taking a chance with your reputation? I don't even care about the money at that point. It's an issue of, so if I can't do it this one time, I have to admit for the rest of my life that I'm A, a liar, or B, stupid. I just convinced myself it was real. So you have to be real careful. And the thing for all of you, if you ever run into debunking, it's just let them have their belief. People have different beliefs. Let them have their belief.
Right,
so
right.
what?
Don't argue with them.
That's right. So what? I mean, and their belief is legit from where they're coming from. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that.
Dina and I went to a book signing at Book Passage in Port Madera. Dr. Dean
Radin, yeah.
Of the University of Nevada at Las Vegas published this book called The Conscious Universe. So he gave a little talk and he answered questions. And two guys from the back, who I guess were in the Skeptic Society or something, I mean, they were rude, but they just started in, they challenged practically every paragraph. Why did you use this experiment? It turned out to be bogus. And he just stood at the podium, gritted his teeth and said, read the book. And he was Drake's Under Fire. And I were working on a ghost book, and I leaned over with some other ladies, I leaned over to Dina and I said, this is a preview of coming events. Because I heard they were out there, but and they were rude, and they monopolized.
Having spoken to skeptics groups over the years, most of the people who come to those skeptics meetings generally are very reasonable people.
Yeah.
They may not walk away thinking that they believe you, but at least they feel that you've got your own viewpoint.
Yeah.
But there are people who won't allow for anything. One of the talks that I gave, I was talking earlier today about the geomagnetic field effects. And some of the studies that are in there have more to do with psychology, and they have nothing to do with parapsychology whatsoever. None at all. And I, at that time, had a couple of references to those, and I was talking about that in my talk, and somebody in the audience who was an astronomer basically said, I don't believe it, you're making this up. I said, read the journals. Well, you're making it up. I wasn't making, these are legitimate journals. Some of the people in the audience had heard of them, in fact. And the fact is that parapsychology is not a physical science. This is a social science, for the most part. Yeah, there may be physics involved in consciousness. This is a social science. Social science has very little replicability. Social science has a lot of controversy. There's no one idea about the human mind. Look at all the different schools of psychological thought. It's anthropology, it's anecdote. Social science is not hard science. It's very different. So there's not an exact thing here. And we're trying to deal with phenomena that we can't even deal with that. If you ask one of these same people, do you believe in the existence of the human mind? Some will say yes, and some will say no. The ones that say yes, prove it to me. The ones that say no, prove it to me. So you have to consider those things. All right. One last point before we get to the final, just a couple minutes of question and answer, because we want to close this out. I just wanted to talk about the media real quick. If somebody calls you up and says, and this has happened many times, that I've got this ghost in my house, and I've already talked to hard copy, and we need you to come in, and by the way, how much money am I going to make in this? Because usually if they already have talked to the media, there's a money issue right away. And I've had people say, I've got this great picture of a ghost, and do you think I can make money at this with this picture? It's like, why? You know, and we have Dina and Kathy in the audience. You can say, oh yeah, we'd like to find that out too.
Find somewhere, let me know.
Yeah, when somebody comes to me with already having contact with the media, I'm suspicious. Because there's often an ulterior motive there that has little to do with trying to deal with their issue. Why do they want me in there? Now, if it's a restaurant who says, we talk to the media, then I go in and see whether there's a ghost there or not. I mean, it's that kind of thing. But if it's a family situation, there's some other ulterior motive happening there. If a TV show comes to me, it's with a case, that's different. Then we have a different motivation. The TV show obviously has a situation. But sometimes I've had shows say, we were called by this, sightings and other shows get calls from individuals or families who have these cases. And sometimes the TV people say, we got this call from this family. Sounds like a really good case, but let me tell you what's going on. You tell me if you think this is real, because they're asking a lot of money for us to come out and shoot their case. So you have to really pay attention to those things as well. Be really careful about that. Now, I'll tell you the converse of this. I just got an email from 3 people down in LA. They're at an apartment complex, and they just moved in recently, and they've had a lot of really negative things moving around and stuff happening. And they went to the apartment management and said they want to move to a different apartment. There's plenty of empty apartments in this place. And the management said, absolutely not. You're stuck in here for a year. You got a lease. Can't move without penalty. Heavy financial penalty. And they're trying to really reason with and they're having really a hard time. And I've referred them to a friend of mine down in LA. In the meantime, I've made some suggestions, one of which was to find out if any neighbors knew that the place was haunted. And whether if you can show that the management knew the place was haunted, even though this normally applies to sale of property, there are disclosure laws in California that you can't sell a property that has a problem with it without revealing that problem. And that includes hauntings, by the way. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you know it's haunted, you better disclose that. That can bring you more money in certain markets, by the way.
Oh, yes,
So
definitely.
there are plenty of people who want a haunted apartment.
Yes.
So that's one thing to help get them out of the apartment. Obviously we want to deal with the phenomena also. The other thing I suggested is this apartment complex does not want publicity. Guess what? If my friend can't help you, or doesn't have the time to help you, you call the local TV station. It's Halloween. You have them come over with a news crew. You talk to them on camera and make sure they get a great picture of the sign in the apartment complex. And you tell them what's going on. Guarantee that complex will be really nice to you if you tell them you're about to do that, or if you've already done that. They'll tell you they can't come on the grounds. I'd like to see them try to stop a news crew. Sightings and some of the other shows that are not news would not have probably the same ability to get on, but a news crew? I don't think so. So sometimes you may have to suggest to people in extreme situations, this is an extreme situation, that maybe they do need to call the media. Okay, so
And that should work.
Right,
I'm sure it's going to work for them.
But be aware that will happen down the road, and at any point I'm going to give everybody has our contact through Annette, and I'll make sure you got more information from me. But one of the things we're going to be talking about in the future in other seminars, I'll be doing one at Rosebridge, in fact, on the paranormal and the media. Something we've been putting off for a while that the students really want me to do. It's important to know how to deal with the media for this, especially in our field where the media is focused so heavily on it.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay, should we take a last Q&A? So we want a microphone monitor, so we can do this for about 5 minutes. And then, of course, while we're closing down later, you can ask more questions. Anyone have any final questions for us?
My question is, I saw a friend had moved from Texas to California, and I had seen a ghost by him who was kind of a Confederate soldier. And I'm wondering, they said that he had been with them in Texas. I'm wondering,
Can ghosts travel across the country? Well, no reason why not. They can probably fly first class, too, without being caught.
Free.
Free, that's right. It's that whole thing that it's very possible, it seems to be very possible and very likely that there's no reason why ghosts can't climb in a car, can't, travel there on, whether they fly or not, we don't really know, but there's no reason why not. They're not necessarily limited to that.
Have you investigated any cases like that?
Not that long distance, but certainly one of the cases I've done where I had this 12-year-old boy talking to the ghost, telling us about the heaven or hell thing. The ghost actually, apparently, to make sure that we weren't bringing blasters to the situation, somehow got to Walnut Creek and got in my car in Walnut Creek with me and the 2 other investigators and eavesdropped on our conversation all the way down to Livermore, where this case was. We know that because the ghost later, through the boy, asked us each a question related directly to the conversation that had nothing to do with the investigation. And it was very specific questions about the conversations we had had. Now, I didn't think my car was bugged. Maybe it was. I mean, that'd be very unlikely. I think it's less likely in most cases than thinking of a ghost. But there was definitely there. So the ghost, obviously, I didn't think to ask her how she got to Walnut Creek, though. You know, I would have, did she catch a bus? Did she hitchhike? You know, that's that phantom hitchhiker effect. That's why they vanish when you let them go. Yes.
It sounds as if you graduate Rosebridge.
Okay.
It sounds as if you graduate Rosebridge or transpersonal psychology and ghost busting or something that, you know, you have to be an entrepreneur or jobs might be really hard to.
You know, the problem in parapsychology is that there are very few labs around the country. There are very few jobs from that perspective. Making money doing investigations, there's no funding for that. Nobody has, unless you can find a private investor or funder for that, or unless you can find a TV show to pay you to do things like that. So you really do have to be an entrepreneur, whether it's an author entrepreneur, a speaker entrepreneur, or whatever else. If you, many of the people who do investigations are actually in laboratories also. So if you can find some other way to connect that, that's great. But there are a lot of people out there who have other jobs. A friend of mine in New Jersey, Pete Jordan, is a stand-up comic in his other life. I have another friend who is a cop in his other life. You know, so I work for an online information company part-time. So you can find a variety of other ways.
So you have to do it for the love, the love of it, of wanting to know more about it for yourself. Hopefully, maybe in about 5 years, you can change that.
Yes. In fact, I will say, though, that one other aspect, I've got a number of folks in the Psychic Entertainers Association who are going to be doing investigations in connection with me around the country. Their knowledge of how to fake or how to work with some of this in an entertainment context gives them a direct edge, especially for many of them who have a real good background in reading parapsychology. So a lot of them are very interested in doing investigations, which is great. Anybody else?
A quick comment, even though it's, you would probably address it in your forthcoming thing with the media, but do you find that it helps you or it hinders you now that there are so many shows that come from a very wide spectrum on this issue?
I think both of us can probably address this question. You know,
I think it's good. I think what it's done is created a lot of interest, and everyone seems to be very, very interested in this phenomena, period. I mean, whether it's psychic, paranormal, ghost. When you start talking about ghosts, people just get kind of excited and say, oh yeah, well tell me, you know, I want to know about that. And so I think there's a great interest right now.
And it's actually better that there's a range of shows because that gives people comparisons.
Yes.
You can kind of, and I've had people say this to me. They'll see one show and say, you know, obviously this show seemed really good, on point, but compared to that, oh my God, that show was awful. And you have shows now, things appearing on the Discovery Channel, on Arts and Entertainment, and the History Channel, and the Learning Channel. And some of them are not that great, but some of them are very good. They're doing documentary style stuff, so they're taking a little bit more time. So you have a comparison, which you never had before.
Right, and the more documentary that is done, and the more research that is shown on the media, I think the more the public is going to want to know about it.
Okay, do we have one more question? Okay, we have one more over here, and then we'll finish up.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Do you get an activity, then you get a reading, or do you get a reading and then get an activity?
In terms of the magnetic field detector, I get a report, and I'll get a reading. Now, whether, you know, interestingly enough, in poltergeist cases, we don't get a reading. In haunting cases, we have a pretty static, stationary reading because it's a pattern embedded in the environment. With apparition cases, when we've got readings, it's because people say the apparition's moving through the room. So it's 3 different types of phenomena, and we get 3 different types of readings, which makes perfect sense. Well, let's kind of finish up here. You have any final comments for everybody? Because I have a couple things to say just at the very end. But we do want to thank you for coming today. I just want to finish up with a couple comments. First, a quote. This is from Kathleen Sky, who's a science fiction writer. There is no such thing as the supernatural. There are only things that we don't understand yet. That's the case in science. It's certainly the case around the paranormal. None of this is supernatural. None of it's outside the range of the natural world. It happens in the natural world. We're just trying to understand it. As we explore, we kind of learn more, although right now it comes in very minute pieces for us. So piece by piece, we're just trying to gather this information. We do need to understand. That's why looking at this as a mystery makes much more sense. If you look at the unknown as a mystery, then of course curiosity and wonder are going to reign over fear, and that's the best way that science and our knowledge base really moves forward. I just want to quote my friend Martin Caden, my late friend Martin Caden, and that is that this stuff often happens between that great expanse between our right ear and our left ear. And most importantly, there's something you can't ignore. It shouldn't be happening, but it is. I want to thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
And that's it for our 5th tape in our seminar series. You've learned a bit more about some of the other considerations, but you know, there's even more that you need to know. And with each of our tapes, we've included a bibliography for further reading on parapsychology in general and on investigative techniques and the phenomena in particular. It's important that you learn more. And to that end, we will be providing further tapes in this series to teach you more about becoming an investigator and understanding the phenomena that we call psychic in this world. Be there with us.